My son has a peculiar sense of humor. It's dry, like kindling, and usually requires a bit of context to catch fire. But the thing he said to me over the phone last Christmas, the thing that set this whole saga in motion, was delivered with all the comedic timing of a eulogy. He thought he was dropping a punchline, but what he really dropped was a grenade, right into the quiet, unassuming foxhole of my life. He told me to forget about his inheritance, and in that moment, he signed the death warrant for the man I used to be, the man who gave everything and asked for nothing. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've always been a patient man. I prefer to let it simmer. What followed wasn't just cold. It was a 5-course meal of karmic justice, served with a side of delicious, undeniable proof. You won't believe what I did next, and that, I promise you, was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Part 1, The Endless Giving. For the better part of 30 years, my hands were my life. They were the tools that built a business, a home, and a family. I'm a carpenter by trade, or at least I was before I retired. Not the kind you see on television, all gleaming teeth and sponsored power tools. The real kind. The kind that knows the soul of wood, the particular sigh a length of cedar makes when it's plain just right, the stubborn pride of an old-growth oak beam. My hands are a roadmap of that life, a constellation of faded scars, thickened knuckles, and a thumb that's never quite sat right since a framing job went sideways back in '98. They're not pretty, but they're honest. They're the hands that paid for my son Kevin's Ivy League education, the hands that wrote the check for the down payment on his sprawling Seattle home, the hands that, until recently, were still paying the mortgage on it. My wife, Mary, always said I had a giving problem. "Frank," she'd say, her voice gentle but firm like velvet wrapped around a steel rod, "you can't pour from an empty cup." She was right, of course. She was always right. But after she was gone, the silence in our little Spokane house was so vast, so profound, that filling Kevin's cup seemed like the only way to keep the quiet from swallowing me whole. And oh, what a thirsty cup he was. Or rather, they were. Kevin married Tiffany 10 years ago. Tiffany is an experience. She's the human equivalent of an Instagram filter. Bright, glossy, and curated to project an effortless perfection that requires a staggering amount of effort. She grew up in Bellevue, a world away from my working-class neighborhood, and she never let you forget it. Her vocabulary was peppered with words like aesthetic, synergy, and authenticity, usually in reference to a $500 pair of yoga pants or a new line of organic, gluten-free, artisanal dog biscuits. I tried to like her, I truly did, for Kevin's sake. I'd sit at their polished concrete dining table, a table I secretly knew cost more than my first truck, and I'd listen to her talk about their brand. They weren't people, you see, they were a brand. Kevin, who had a perfectly respectable degree in economics, was now a lifestyle consultant, which seemed to involve him giving vague advice to other wealthy people about how to spend their money. Tiffany was a wellness influencer, which meant she took beautifully lit photos of herself doing yoga on tropical beaches and posted them with captions about finding your truth. The irony, of course, was that their truth was being financed by my pension and the nest egg Mary, and I had painstakingly built over 40 years of frugal living. Every time Kevin called, it was with a new opportunity. "Dad, hey, listen, Tiff and I found this incredible investment. It's a startup that connects discerning pet owners with holistic animal communicators. It's going to be huge. We just need a little liquid capital to get in on the ground floor." That was $50,000. I never heard about the animal communicators again. "Dad, the market in Seattle is just exploding. We have a chance to get into this exclusive neighborhood, but the down payment is, well, it's a Seattle down payment." That was $200,000. I sold a plot of land Mary and I had bought, a place where we dreamed of building a small cabin for our retirement. I told myself she would have wanted me too. Kevin promised it was a sacred trust, that I'd be a silent partner in their biggest asset. The asset, A glass and steel monstrosity with more bathrooms than people, became Tiffany's primary stage. Her social media was a fire hose of curated opulence. There was Tiffany sipping champagne in the freestanding tub. Self-care is a revolutionary act. Blessed. There was Kevin grilling Wagyu steaks on a barbecue that looked like it could launch a satellite. Fueling the hustle. Power couple. There were pictures of their son, my grandson Aiden, surrounded by a mountain of toys that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Meanwhile, I was living my own truth back in Spokane. My F-150, a reliable old beast from 2008, coughed and sputtered every morning, but it got me where I needed to go. I still wore the Carhartt jacket I'd bought a decade ago, the elbows patched with duct tape because I couldn't be bothered to buy a new one. My big splurge for the week was buying the brand name coffee instead of the store brand. I wasn't bitter, not then. I was resigned. This was my role. I was the foundation, the unseen support structure that allowed their glittering facade to stand. I told myself it was what a father did. You provide, you sacrifice. You pour until you're empty, and then you try to find a little more to give. The phone calls became a ritual. First, the pleasantries. How was I? Was the weather okay? Then the pivot, a sigh. A carefully chosen word about the stress they were under. The boiler had gone out. The property taxes were higher than expected. Aiden needed a special kind of preschool that taught Mandarin and mindfulness. The requests were always couched in the language of crisis, of parental duty, of maintaining the life they felt they and my grandson deserved. And I always paid. I'd transfer the money, listen to their effusive, temporary gratitude, and then hang up the phone, the silence of my little house rushing back in. I'd walk past the photos on the mantelpiece, Mary and me on our wedding day. Kevin as a gap-toothed kid holding up a trout he'd caught. A family that felt like it belonged to another man in another lifetime. The dream vacation Mary and I had always planned, a month-long tour of the great cathedrals of Europe, was still just a collection of dusty brochures in my desk drawer. I'd look at the pictures of Notre Dame and St. Peter's Basilica and feel a pang of longing. I wanted to see them, to run my hands over stone that had been shaped by other craftsmen centuries ago, to feel the weight of all that history. But then the phone would ring, and Kevin would have a new emergency, and Europe would recede a little further into the realm of fantasy. My own small rebellion was a bottle of 25-year-old single malt scotch I kept in the back of the pantry. I'd bought it the day I retired, promising myself I'd open it to celebrate a great milestone. Instead, it became my silent companion in descent. After a particularly galling request, $10,000 for an essential kitchen renovation that involved replacing perfectly good granite countertops with a different kind of perfectly good granite, I'd pour a single finger of that scotch into a heavy glass. The warmth of the forbidden pour, the smoky peat flavor hitting my tongue, was a small, secret act of defiance. It was the only thing that was truly mine. I'd sit on my porch, sipping that liquid gold, watching the sun set over the Cascades, and find a dark, quiet amusement in the absurdity of it all. I was funding a life I didn't understand, for a son I barely recognized, while my own dreams gathered dust in a drawer. The cup was empty, but I kept on pouring. Part 2, the Christmas exclusion. The holidays have a way of magnifying everything. Joy feels more joyful, sorrow feels more sorrowful, and the hairline cracks in a family's foundation can suddenly look like chasms. For me, Christmas had always been a time of sacred tradition, a bulwark against the changing world. When Mary was alive, our house was a beacon of warmth and light. The smell of baking gingerbread and roasting pine would permeate every room. We'd host the whole neighborhood, our home filled with laughter and carols and the chaotic joy of children. After she passed, I tried to keep the spirit alive. It was quieter, more subdued, but the traditions remained. The tree, the lights, the worn-out copy of A Christmas Carol I'd read aloud on Christmas Eve. It was my anchor, and I clung to it. My one condition for all my financial support was that Kevin, Tiffany, and Aiden spend Christmas with me in Spokane. It wasn't a demand, but a deeply felt need. I didn't care about their fancy life in Seattle. For 2 days a year, I just wanted my family. Last year, the cracks began to show. They arrived late on Christmas Eve, sweeping in with a flurry of designer luggage and palpable impatience. Tiffany spent most of the time on her phone, engaging with her community, while Kevin paced around, taking business calls in hushed, important tones. My grandson, Aiden, a sweet boy buried under a mountain of parental expectation, seemed overwhelmed by the sheer simplicity of my home. He looked at the vintage Lionel train set chugging around the base of my tree with the same mild curiosity he might afford a pigeon in the park. Still, I tried. I made Mary's famous roast beef. I put on the Bing Crosby records. I endured Tiffany's thinly veiled critiques of my decor. "Oh, Frank, how wonderfully vintage," and Kevin's constant talk of stock options and leveraged buyouts. I held on to the hope that a flicker of the old magic remained. The final straw didn't come with a bang. It came with the quiet, surgical precision of a phone call 2 weeks before this Christmas. I had just gotten off the phone with my credit card company, having paid a staggering $7,000 bill. It was Kevin's emergency card, the one I kept active for them. The charge, they'd assured me, was for essential repairs to their home's heating system. "The boiler is on its last legs, Dad," Kevin had said, his voice laced with manufactured panic. "We can't risk Aiden getting cold." A few days later, I was scrolling through Facebook, something I rarely do, when a photo from one of Tiffany's friends popped up. It was a group shot, tagged from Aspen, Colorado. There in the center, grinning from ear to ear in brand new ski gear, were Kevin and Tiffany. The caption read, "Best impromptu ski trip ever, nothing like the mountain air to recharge the soul, Aspen life making memories." The date on the post corresponded exactly with the credit card charge. The boiler wasn't broken. They were just recharging their souls on my dime. A cold, heavy feeling settled in my gut. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the dull, aching feeling of a truth you've long suspected but refused to acknowledge. I was no longer a father. I was a bank, an ATM with a pulse. That was when the phone rang. It was Kevin. His voice was breezy, almost cheerful. "Hey, Dad, how's it going?" "I'm fine, son. Just paying some bills." The sarcasm was so subtle I barely registered it myself. "Great, great. Listen, Tiff and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. You know, estate planning and all that." My heart sank. This was new. Usually they just asked for money. Talking about my eventual death felt like a new level of transactional coldness. "We were talking about Aiden," he continued, his voice taking on a slightly rehearsed quality. "He's set to inherit a nice little nest egg from us one day. Better than what I'm getting, eh, Dad?" He let out a short, sharp laugh that didn't have a trace of humor in it. Then came the line, the one that replayed in my head for weeks, a perfect, crystalline moment of betrayal. "Dad, forget about the inheritance," my son joked. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between Seattle and Spokane. Then his voice dropped, losing all pretense of levity. "He wasn't joking, you know." Silence. The grandfather clock in my hallway ticked, each second a hammer blow. "What do you mean, Kevin?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Well, Tiffany and I were talking," he said, the "we" a clear sign that this was her script. "And given our, our status, and the complexities of our financial portfolio, we feel it would be better if the estate passes directly to Aiden. It's just more efficient for tax purposes, a generation-skipping trust. You understand, and honestly, we don't want you feeling obligated to leave us anything. Consider it a gift, a release." A gift. He was packaging my complete and utter erasure as a present. They didn't want the money I'd leave behind. They wanted the rest of it, and they wanted it now. And then they wanted to be free of the messy obligation of a father who still wore a patched-up coat. He wasn't cutting me out of his will. He was cutting me out of the narrative of his success. My life's work was to be a footnote, a tax-efficient transfer to the next, more important generation. I was still processing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all when he delivered the final blow. "Oh, and about Christmas," he said, his tone suddenly brisk, as if he were wrapping up a business meeting. "We're actually going to be in California this year. Tiffany's parents have this amazing place in Napa, and her family is just so much more, vibrant. It'll be better for Aiden to be around all those cousins. So don't worry about making the trip down or anything. We'll FaceTime you from the vineyard. And that was it. The anchor was cut. My one condition, the single thread that connected me to the idea of family, was snipped without a moment's hesitation. They'd spent $7,000 on a ski trip, lied about it, and then called to formally dismiss me from my duties as both a father and a grandfather, all under the guise of fiscal prudence and holiday cheer. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I just stood there, the receiver cold against my ear, listening to the dial tone. I looked around the quiet room, at the boxes of decorations waiting to be unpacked, at the photo of Mary smiling at me from the mantel. The chasm had finally opened up, and I was standing on the edge, looking into the abyss. But as I stood there, the dull ache in my gut began to change. It sharpened, crystallized, and cooled into something new, something hard and clear. It was resolve. Part 3, the mortgage cutoff. For a long time after that call, I just sat. The winter sun, already low in the sky, cast long shadows across the living room carpet, the dust motes dancing in the fading light. The house was utterly silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was the kind of quiet that had once felt lonely, a painful echo of Mary's absence. But now it felt different. It felt like peace. It felt like the calm, clean slate of a workshop before the first cut is made. The grief I had expected, the hot flare of anger, never came. In its place was a profound and unsettling clarity. Kevin's words hadn't broken my heart. They had cauterized a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. For years, I had been pouring my life, my resources, and my love into a vessel that was not just cracked, but a sieve. And now the pouring was done. I didn't storm around the house. I didn't shout into the emptiness. My movements were slow, deliberate, as if I were waking from a long illness. I walked over to my old roll-top desk, the one I'd built myself from a single slab of cherry wood 40 years ago. The wood was warm and smooth under my calloused fingers. I rolled back the top with a familiar, satisfying rumble. Inside, beneath a stack of old invoices and blueprints, was a leather-bound folder. The label on it, written in Mary's neat, elegant script, simply said, "Seattle House." I opened it. There it was, all of it. The original loan application, the title deed, the bank statements. And right on top, the paperwork for the automatic payment I had set up years ago. A payment that drafted directly from my retirement account on the first of every month to pay the mortgage on their glass and steel castle. Kevin's name was on the deed, but my money was the lifeblood that kept it in their possession. He'd called me a silent partner once. He had no idea how right he was. I picked up the phone, the same phone on which I'd received my walking papers just an hour earlier. I dialed the number for my bank, a number I knew by heart. The familiar tinny hold music started to play, a bland, synthesized version of a song I couldn't name. It was the soundtrack to my own fleecing, the music I listened to every time I called to transfer another few $1,000s to their emergency fund. This time, it sounded different. It sounded like a fanfare. "Thank you for calling Northwest Mutual Bank. This is Brenda. How can I help you?" Her voice was professionally cheerful. "Hello, Brenda," I said, my own voice even and steady. "My name is Frank Miller. I'd like to cancel an automatic payment." I gave her the account numbers and the details. There was a flurry of clicking on her keyboard. "Okay, Mr. Miller, I see that payment here. It's a monthly mortgage payment to Seattle Metropolitan Credit Union. Can I ask the reason for the cancellation?" I paused, a small, wry smile touching my lips. I could have said anything. I could have made up a story. But the truth felt too delicious to waste. "My son joked that I should forget about his inheritance," I said simply. "I've decided to take his advice and get a head start." There was a moment of confused silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture her sitting in a cubicle somewhere trying to process that sentence. Okay, sir. One moment." More clicking. "All right, that automatic payment has been canceled, effective immediately." The next scheduled payment for January 1st will not be processed. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, Brenda, I said, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. That's everything, thank you. I hung up the phone with a satisfying click. It was done. A single phone call, a few polite words, and a decades-long pattern of self-abnegation was broken. The foundation I had provided for their glittering life was gone. Now we would see how well their house was built. I walked into the kitchen and over to the pantry. Reaching behind a bag of flour and a row of canned beans, my fingers found the familiar smooth glass of the 25-year-old scotch. I pulled it out. The amber liquid glowed in the dim light. I'd been saving it for a milestone. Well, this was one. I didn't bother with a small pour this time. I filled a heavy tumbler with a generous 3 fingers of the stuff, no ice. I walked back into the living room and stood before the mantelpiece. I looked at the photograph of Mary, her smile so full of life and love it made my heart ache. I raised my glass to her. "Well, hun," I whispered, my voice a little thick. "The boy's finally on his own. I think you'd agree it's about damn time." I took a long, slow sip. The scotch was magnificent. It tasted of smoke and peat and oak, but mostly it tasted of freedom. The burning warmth spread through my chest, a stark contrast to the icy resolve that had taken root in my soul. I sat down in my worn leather armchair, the one that had molded itself to my shape over the years, and I savored the taste of my rebellion. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent white. It was the beginning of a new season, and I had a feeling the coming storm was going to be one for the ages. Part 4, the airport abandonment. In carpentry, there's a principle of delayed consequences. You can make a bad cut, use the wrong joint, or fail to account for the grain of the wood, and the piece will still hold together. For a while. It might look fine on the surface, but stress, time, and pressure will eventually find that weakness, and the whole thing will come apart. So it was with Kevin and Tiffany's finances. My canceled mortgage payment on January 1st was the bad cut, but for a month the structure held. They were blissfully unaware. The first notice from the bank was probably buried under a pile of Tiffany's press packages, and a stack of catalogs for things they couldn't afford but bought anyway. They lived in a world of digital alerts and automatic payments. The quaint, analog reality of a paper envelope marked "past due" simply didn't penetrate their curated bubble. The first tremor came not from the bank, but from a more sacred institution, their credit card, the one I paid for. The one with the ridiculously high limit that functioned as their personal slush fund for life's little emergencies, like Aspen ski trips and Michelin star dinners. It was a Tuesday in early February when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a Hawaiian area code. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message came through. It was from Kevin. "Dad, call me. Now, it's an emergency." I felt a ghost of the old reflex, the familiar lurch of paternal anxiety. Was Aiden hurt? Was there an accident? Then I remembered. I was retired from that job. I took a slow sip of my coffee, walked over to my workbench, and began sharpening a hand plane. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone was calming. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Kevin's number. I let it ring. And again, on the 5th try, I decided to pick up. The entertainment value alone was worth it. "What's the emergency, son?" I asked, my voice as placid as a mill pond. "Dad, thank God, what is going on?" He was shouting, his voice tight with panic and outrage. In the background, I could hear the tinny, chaotic announcements of an airport terminal. "We're here at the Honolulu airport. We were supposed to be on our way to Maui for a wellness retreat Tiffany was invited to speak at." "Was invited?" I asked, testing the sharpness of the plane's edge with my thumb. "What happened?" "What happened? The credit card was declined, that's what happened. The one for emergencies, declined. We tried to pay for the puddle jumper to Maui and it was declined. We tried to pay for our rental car, declined. Do you have any idea how?" "Embarrassing that is," I almost smiled. "I can imagine." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line. "So what did you do? Did you cancel it? Is this some kind of sick joke? We're stranded, Dad." I didn't cancel the card, Kevin, I said calmly. I just stopped paying the bill. A few months ago, actually. I assumed you'd take over the payments yourself. Silence. I could hear him processing this, the gears in his head grinding with the unfamiliar effort of personal responsibility. Then, a new voice cut in, sharp and venomous. It was Tiffany. Frank, what is this? What are you doing? Her voice, usually so smooth and melodic for her online followers, was a shrill, ugly thing. Are you trying to ruin us? Is this because of Christmas? Are you that petty? My God, I knew you were getting senile, but this is. Hello, Tiffany, I said, my tone still infuriatingly serene. I'm not senile. I'm just taking your husband's financial advice. You both made it very clear you didn't want to be burdened by my money in the future. I'm just helping you get accustomed to that reality a little ahead of schedule. Think of it as a financial detox. The word detox was a masterstroke. It was her language, her brand. Using it as a weapon felt exquisite. Her shriek was pure, unfiltered fury. We are at an airport with your grandson. We have no way to get to our hotel. We have no way to pay for anything. This is insane. Well, you're resourceful people, I said, setting the plane down. You're influencers. Surely you can influence a taxi driver to give you a ride. Or maybe one of your animal communicator friends can telepathically send you some cash. That was it. The line went dead. I pictured them there, standing amidst the floral shirts and sunburnt tourists, their curated world crumbling around them. Their power, their status, was entirely built on a foundation of my money. I hadn't just pulled a single brick out. I had vaporized the whole slab. The counterattack came later that day. It was, of course, on social media. Tiffany was a warrior in the arena of vague posting, and she came out swinging. She posted a stark black and white photo of her hand holding Aiden's. The caption was a masterwork of passive-aggressive martyrdom, navigating unexpected turbulence today. It's heartbreaking when you have to protect your child from the toxic behavior of those who should be their greatest champions. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is setting boundaries with your own. Sending love to anyone else dealing with the pain and confusion of watching a loved one decline in their old age. Family struggles protect your peace, elderly care. The comments section exploded with sympathy. Oh, Tiff, sending you so much strength. So sorry you're going through this. Setting boundaries is so important. It's so hard when they get old and bitter. Stay strong for your beautiful family. They were painting me as a vindictive, mentally incompetent old man who had lashed out at his loving family for no reason. It was a clever, cowardly attack. They didn't name me, of course. They just built a narrative, a lie designed to isolate me and garner sympathy for themselves. Friends of mine from Spokane started calling, confused. Frank, is everything all right? I saw this post from your daughter-in-law. I reassured them I was fine. But as I read the post again, I didn't feel anger. I felt an odd sense of exhilaration. They thought this was a battle of public opinion, of whispers and innuendo. They had no idea what kind of war I was preparing for. They were firing arrows into the dark. I was building a cannon, and I had all the ammunition I would ever need, sitting right there in a leather-bound folder on my cherrywood desk. The strategist in me, the builder, the man who understood that a strong structure requires patience and precision, was wide awake. And he was just getting started. Part 5, Gathering the Receipts. In carpentry, the most important part of any project is the prep work. You don't just start cutting wood. You measure, you plan, you draw up blueprints. You make sure every angle is true and every measurement is precise. Rushing the prep is how you end up with a crooked house. Tiffany and Kevin had built a very crooked house, and I was about to become the most meticulous building inspector they had ever met. Their social media smear campaign, which continued for weeks with passive-aggressive posts about generational trauma and difficult parents, was a tactical error on their part. They assumed I was an old man who didn't understand their world. They thought I was technologically illiterate, a relic from a bygone era. They were wrong. I may not have understood the appeal of a wellness influencer, but I understood the immutable power of evidence. My quiet, modest house in Spokane transformed into a war room. The dining table, which had sat mostly unused since Mary's passing, was now covered in neat stacks of paper. This was not a rage-fueled rampage. It was a forensic accounting of my own generosity, conducted with the cold, dispassionate precision of an auditor. I started with the bank. I requested 10 years of complete statements from every account I held. When the thick manila envelopes arrived, I spent days going through them, a highlighter in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. Every wire transfer to Kevin, every check written, every credit card payment was highlighted in fluorescent yellow. I created a spreadsheet. The columns were simple: date, amount, and purpose, as stated by Kevin. The purpose column became a novel of tragicomic fiction. Boiler repair, $7,000. Aspen ski trip. Aiden's educational fund, $15,000, coincided with the purchase of a new Tesla. Property tax shortfall, $10,000. Tiffany's 35th birthday party in Cabo. Leaky roof crisis, $5,000. A weekend at a luxury spa for Tiffany and her friends. The numbers were staggering. Stripped of their emotional appeals and false pretenses, they told a stark and brutal story. Over 10 years, I had given them more than $500,000, not including the down payment or the ongoing mortgage payments for their house. I was looking at the documented history of my own foolishness, but I felt no shame. I felt only the clarifying power of facts. Next, I turned my attention to the prosecution's star witness, Tiffany's social media. I might be old, but I wasn't stupid. I knew how to take a screenshot. I created a new folder on my desktop titled Exhibit A for hours. I scrolled back through years of her Instagram and Facebook feeds. It was a digital monument to their hypocrisy. I saved everything. The photo of the new countertops in their kitchen, posted with the caption, "Our home is our sanctuary, folded hands home vibes," was saved and placed next to the bank statement showing my $10,000 transfer for a kitchen emergency. The picture of Kevin on a golf course in Pebble Beach, titled Closing Deals in Paradise Person Mail Hustle, was matched with his panicked email from that same week, begging for money to cover an unexpected tax bill. I saved pictures of designer handbags, exotic vacations, extravagant dinners, and cases of wine that cost more than my monthly utility bills. Each image was a testament to their lavish lifestyle, a lifestyle they presented to the world as the fruit of their own hard work, but which I knew was funded by my deferred dreams and a patched-up Carhartt jacket. I cross-referenced dates, times, and amounts until I had a perfect, undeniable timeline of deceit. The crown jewel, however, was the email. The one Kevin had sent me 8 years ago when he'd asked for the down payment. I had to dig through an old hard drive to find it, but there it was. I printed it out and read the words which I had once found so moving. "Dad, this is more than just a house. It's a foundation for our family, for Aiden. Your help wouldn't just be a loan, it would be a sacred trust. I know I'm asking a lot, but I swear to you I will honor this investment in our future. You'll be a silent partner in our biggest asset, a silent partner." The words practically hummed with legal significance. With my mountain of evidence compiled, I made my next move. I called a lawyer. Not some old crony from the golf club, but the sharpest, most ruthless family law attorney in Spokane. Her name was Sarah Jennings, and she had a reputation for being a shark in a pantsuit. I sat in her sleek, modern office, my worn work boots looking out of place on the plush carpet. I didn't give her a sob story. I didn't talk about my feelings or my broken heart. I simply opened my briefcase and laid the folders on her polished mahogany desk. "This is a financial record of my support for my son and his wife over the past decade," I said. "And this is a record of their corresponding lifestyle. And this," I said, sliding the printed email to the center of the desk, "is the agreement upon which the largest transaction was based." He called it a sacred trust and made me a silent partner. They have since defaulted on that trust, and I would like to know my options for liquidating my share of the asset. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with piercing blue eyes, read the email first. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She spent the next hour looking through my documents, her expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching glee. She looked up at me, her eyes glinting. "Mr. Miller," she said, leaning back in her chair. "They called you a silent partner, in writing." "They did," I said. "And you have meticulously documented hundreds of thousands of dollars in direct financial contributions to the maintenance and improvement of this asset, not to mention the mortgage payments you've been making. To the penny." She steepled her fingers. "Mr. Miller, this is not a family squabble. This is a business dispute, and based on what I'm seeing, you are not just a silent partner. You are the primary shareholder. They haven't just been ungrateful. They've been committing a very polite, very well-photographed form of fraud." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out a strategy. It was beautiful in its simplicity and its brutality. I left her office feeling 10 feet tall. The old carpenter, the man who lived by rules and measures and integrity, was finally building something for himself. A case, a fortress of facts, and the final showdown, I decided, would not take place in a courtroom. It would take place in their sanctuary. The crooked house was about to face its final inspection. Part 6, the holiday dinner ambush. The invitation arrived, as expected, in mid-November. It was an email from Tiffany's mother, a woman named ÖYÄÖi, whose voice always sounded like she was perpetually disappointed in your choice of wine. The tone of the email was a masterclass in strained cordiality. She and her husband, Robert, were hosting Thanksgiving at their home in Seattle this year. It was to be a grand affair, a gathering of their nearest and dearest. And she wrote, they would be so delighted if I could join them. It was time, she cooed through the keyboard, to heal these unfortunate divisions. It was a trap, of course. A beautifully set, tastefully decorated, organic free-range turkey-baited trap. They wanted me on their home turf, surrounded by their allies, where they could corner me, shame me, and pressure me into turning the money spigot back on. They saw a lonely old man, isolated by their smear campaign, and they assumed I would be desperate for a truce. They were about to learn that a man with nothing left to lose is a man you should never, ever underestimate. I replied immediately, "ÖYÄÖi, that is so kind of you. I would be honored to attend. I believe it is long past time we all sat down together." My acceptance clearly threw them for a loop. I could almost hear the confused conference calls between Tiffany and her mother. "He's coming. Why? What is he planning?" Their arrogance, however, won out. They decided I was coming to surrender. Thanksgiving Day arrived, crisp and cold. I drove my old F-150 to Seattle, the cab filled with the scent of sawdust and quiet purpose. I wasn't wearing my usual flannel and jeans. On my lawyer Sarah's advice, I had bought a new suit. It was a simple, dark gray wool, perfectly tailored. I looked respectable. I looked solvent. I looked like a man who was not to be trifled with. On the passenger seat next to me was a handsome leather briefcase. It did not contain a bottle of wine or a festive dessert. It contained my cannon. ÖYÄÖi and Robert's house was in Medina, a neighborhood of obscene wealth that made Kevin and Tiffany's place look like a starter home. It was a sprawling, modernist mansion on the shores of Lake Washington. I parked my dusty Ford between a Porsche and a Bentley, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. I was greeted at the door by ÖYÄÖi, who appraised my suit with a flicker of surprise. "Frank, you came. How wonderful." Her smile was as brittle as spun sugar. The house was filled with people who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for yacht owners. I was introduced around as Kevin's father, the unspoken addendum, the difficult one hanging in the air. Kevin and Tiffany found me by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. They approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of triumph and suspicion. "Dad," Kevin said, his voice low, "I'm glad you came. I hope this means you're ready to be reasonable." "I'm always reasonable, son," I said, giving him a placid smile. "Reason is what I'm here for." The dinner was an excruciating affair. Robert, a retired investment banker with a booming voice and an ego to match, held court at the head of the long, formal dining table. He pontificated about the stock market, about his golf game, about the decline in American values. The subtext was clear. He was the patriarch, the provider, the model of success. I was the poor provincial relation, a charity case to be pitied. I ate my turkey, I complimented the cranberry sauce, and I waited. I was a patient man. I knew that the perfect moment to make a cut was not at the beginning of the project, but when all the pieces were assembled. The moment came, as I knew it would with dessert. As the pumpkin cheesecake was being served, Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of brandy. "You know," he boomed, looking down the table pointedly in my direction. "The most important thing in life, the true measure of a man, is family. It's about providing. It's about building a legacy for your children and grandchildren. It's about knowing when to step up and support the next generation to ensure they have every advantage." The entire table murmured in agreement. Tiffany shot me a look of pure, smug victory. This was it, the public shaming. I dabbed my mouth with a linen napkin, folded it carefully, and placed it on the table. Then I reached down and brought up my leather briefcase, setting it on the table with a soft, authoritative thud. The room fell silent. "Robert, I couldn't agree with you more," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "Legacy and providing for one's family are paramount. Which is why I'm so glad we're all here together to discuss the business arrangement between myself and my son." Kevin went pale. Tiffany's smile froze on her face. I clicked open the briefcase. "You see, I've always considered myself an investor. A carpenter invests his time and skill to build something of lasting value. And for the last decade, my primary investment has been in the brand you've all come to admire, Kevin and Tiffany." I pulled out the first folder, its contents neatly tabbed. "I was a silent partner, you see." Kevin confirmed that in writing. I slid a copy of the Sacred Trust email down the table to Robert. His eyebrows shot up as he read it. "As the primary shareholder," I continued, my voice betraying no emotion, "I've been tracking the company's expenditures. I've brought the receipts just to ensure the board is fully briefed." And then I began. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts, my tone as neutral as a news anchor. On June 12th, a transfer of $15,000 was made for Aiden's educational fund. This coincided with the leasing of a new Tesla, as documented on Tiffany's Instagram. I slid a glossy printout of the car photo across the table. It landed next to the cheese plate. On December 18th, a credit card charge of $7,000 was made for a boiler repair. This coincided with a ski trip to Aspen, also beautifully documented online. Another photo slid across the table, this one of them grinning in. Their ski gear. I went on item by item for 10 minutes. I detailed every major transfer, every false pretense. With each new fact, I produced a corresponding bank statement and a time-stamped, high-resolution screenshot from their social media. A mountain of glossy, undeniable evidence grew in the center of the elegant tablescape. The other guests stared, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The air crackled with a combination of horror and rapt fascination. Eleanor looked like she had swallowed a wasp. Robert's face had gone from ruddy to a deep, dangerous purple. Kevin was staring at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. Tiffany's face was a mask of crumbling disbelief. The influencer was being influenced, and she didn't like it one bit. When I was finished with the financials, I leaned back. As Robert said, a man's duty is to provide, and I have. I provided the down payment for their home. I have provided until recently the monthly mortgage payment. I have provided hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital for their lifestyle. I have been a very good partner. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Then I delivered the final, killing blow. Unfortunately, due to a breach of our verbal and written agreements, the partnership is being dissolved. My lawyer, M.S. Jennings, has already drawn up the paperwork. I pulled out one last document. Since my investment constitutes the vast majority of the equity in their home, and since they are now in default on their mortgage, I am exercising my legal right as the primary investor to force the sale of the asset to recoup my initial C. I'm not being vindictive, I said, looking directly at Tiffany, a faint, cold smile on my lips. I'm just being fiscally responsible. a concept I'm sure everyone at this table understands. I stood up, leaving the mountain of evidence on the table for all to see. Thank you for the lovely dinner, Elena, Robert. The turkey was excellent. I picked up my empty briefcase, turned, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I could feel the weight of their silent, horrified stares on me all the way to the front door. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I felt the satisfying click of the heavy oak door closing behind me. The crooked house had been condemned. Part 7. Savoring the new year. The fallout was not loud, but it was total. Like a building imploding, the collapse of Kevin and Tiffany's world was swift, contained, and devastatingly complete. There were no more angry phone calls, no more social media attacks. There was only a profound, echoing silence. Their friends, the ones who had witnessed the public execution at that Thanksgiving dinner, scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The social circle they had so carefully cultivated was built on the illusion of effortless success. The revelation that it was all a house of cards, financed by a working-class father they had openly scorned, was a stain they couldn't tolerate. My lawyer Sarah, handled everything. True to her word, she was a shark. Faced with the mountain of undeniable evidence, Kevin and Tiffany had no choice but to cooperate. The house, their stage, their sanctuary, their biggest prop, was put on the market in the dead of winter, the worst possible time to sell. They were forced to accept an offer significantly below what they felt it was worth. After the original bank mortgage was paid off, the remaining proceeds were routed directly to me. It wasn't everything I had poured in over the years. The money for vacations and Teslas and artisanal dog biscuits was long gone, but it was the big stuff. The down payment, the mortgage payments, the fake investments. A check for a sum well into the six figures arrived at my little house in Spokane just after the new year. I looked at it for a long time, not with glee, but with a sense of quiet closure. It wasn't about the money. It was about the accounting. The books were finally balanced. I heard through a cousin that Kevin and Tiffany had moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable suburb. The kind of place they would have cruelly mocked a year ago. Kevin, stripped of the capital that allowed him to play at being a big shot, had to get a real job in an accounting firm, putting his expensive economics degree to use in a cubicle. Tiffany's wellness-influencing career evaporated overnight. It turned out that her community wasn't terribly interested in watching her find her truth in a cramped apartment with a view of a parking lot. Her feed went from exotic beaches and designer clothes to nothing, just silence. The brand was bankrupt. As for me, I felt a sense of liberation so profound it was almost dizzying. The weight of their expectations, their endless needs, their constant, low-grade disapproval, it was all gone. My life was finally my own. The first thing I did was sell my house. The little place in Spokane, the one filled with so many memories of Mary, suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too tethered to a past I was ready to leave behind. I sold it to a young family with kids, and the sound of their laughter echoing in the empty rooms as they did the final walkthrough felt like a blessing. I took the proceeds from both sales and did something I should have done 20 years ago. I bought a state-of-the-art RV. A big, beautiful machine with a comfortable bed, a small but efficient kitchen, and a massive panoramic window. I packed light. A few changes of clothes, my best tools, a box of old photographs, and the dusty brochures of the European cathedrals. I took one last look at them, at the pictures of Notre Dame and Chartres, and then with a small smile I put them away. Maybe someday. But right now I felt a different calling. My first trip wasn't to some exotic destination. It was to the coast. I drove west toward the Pacific, and I didn't stop until I could smell the salt in the air. I parked my rig on a cliff overlooking the ocean, made a pot of coffee on my small stove, and just sat there, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The endless, powerful rhythm of the water felt like the world's own heartbeat. From there, I began to wander. I was a man without a schedule, without a destination. I was exploring the great cathedrals of America, the towering granite domes of Yosemite, the vast, silent canyons of Zion, the dense, ancient forests of the Redwood National Park. I sent postcards not to my son, but to old friends from my carpentry days, to Mary's sister in Florida, to people who had known me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The story ends here for now in a small diner off a two-lane highway in Montana. The RV is parked outside, gleaming in the morning sun. I'm sitting in a worn vinyl booth, a map spread out on the table in front of me. I'm sipping a cup of strong, black coffee, and the waitress just called me Hun. Outside, the mountains rise up to scrape against a vast, impossibly blue sky. I looked at my bank account on my phone this morning. The numbers looked good. Solid, a foundation I had built for myself. And I thought about that word Kevin had used on the phone all those months ago. Inheritance. An inheritance is a funny thing. People think it's something you get when someone is gone. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get it back before you even leave. My life is my legacy now, and for the first time in a long, long time, it's all mine. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Share your thoughts on what happened in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the video appearing on your screen now.